Security policies. Okay, so now we have ticket number 3, and for this and ticket number 4, I made a little twist. Let's make it more interesting. You're gonna see in a second. Ticket number 3, the SOC Security Operations Center Monitoring Team dashboard reported more than 1,000 requests to one of our e-commerce servers HTTPS portal in a matter of minutes. The source address identified by our SOC came from Eastern Asia, and we only serve customers in the United States and Europe. Please block access to our DMZ from all internet, but allow USA and Europe. Okay. So we have a clear example of possible DDoS or brute force attempt onto our DMZ zone. And we need to block access from the outside, but allow the United States and Europe. Let's go ahead and configure that. Okay, let's configure that policy that was required by the security team to make sure that we're not getting those attempts. Let's go ahead and click on Add. Okay, in this case, we're going to say outside to DMZ. Source, add. My source traffic will be coming from the outside, from the internet. Source address, this is where we need to say we're coming from the US or Europe only. So it will be applied to the US and Europe only. Click on add, and you can add a region. So if you see here, once we click add on the source address, we can scroll down and we can select the region where the traffic will be coming from. In our case, it was mentioned that only the US and Europe should be able to access the servers. So let's find the US, and you can go ahead also and type United States and it will sort. And we got the US here. And let's click add again, and our next case will be Europe. And we have EU. So now we know that only traffic matching those source, the US and Europe, will be allowed. Destination, in this case, DMZ. Anything on the DMZ, because as long as it's coming from the United States and Europe, that's all I care. Application, any. Service, any, or you can leave this an application default because they're basically web servers. Actions, and we're going to allow. Press OK. I have the policy, but guess what? It is not going to work. Why? Overruling. Remember we mentioned Palo Alto looks on the policy table from top to bottom. So the first rule the Palo Alto is going to see is outside access to web servers. And by the way, it's coming from the same zone, which is my outside zone, going to the same destination, and I'm allowing all addresses. So if I go here, I am allowing any address from the outside hitting the DMZ. So now you wonder, no wonder why the whole planet can hit my DMZ. Because I have a rule on top of every other rule saying that I'm allowing every single outside address to hit my DMZ. And this is allowed. And this is why it's called overruling, meaning that once the Palo Alto sees this one, it matches that so it doesn't continue checking the other ones. So this rule will never be applied. However, if you click the rule and you click and keep pressing your left click, you can move the policy all the way to the top and drop it there. And now it's actually matching against the first one. So the rule that we configure, it will be the new rule that will be inspected to see if the traffic matches. Okay, but guess what? We're not done yet because we still have this policy down below that can still be applied to any other traffic. Because right now, if the traffic comes from the outside to the DMZ, as long as I am part of that region, I am matching this one. If I am not matching this, meaning that I'm not part of this region, it doesn't mean that I'm stopped. No, actually the Palo Alto will check the second one to see if I'm matching this one. And guess what? Yeah, I'm matching. So I'm still through. So the policy is not going to do anything because the second one will still allow traffic through. What you need to do is either convert this to deny, or if you still need to allow for some reason a particular server to be reachable from the entire planet, but everything else, then you configure another policy and allow that, but deny this one. So in this case, we're just going to go ahead and click this policy. We can open the policy and make changes. And now we're going to say actions, deny, and okay. That's one way. The other way, we can just delete it. Why? Because remember, at the beginning we mentioned, we have an inner zone default policy. That policy denies by default traffic ingressing and egressing from different zones. So I don't need to put a deny. I can just let the Palo Alto continue down below, but you got to make sure that nothing else matches this source and destination, because then you might have an overruling here. So then you just let the Palo Alto do its magic and just go straight to the inner zone default, and it will drop the traffic. Okay, so we got that done. Let's do ticket number 4. Okay, our last ticket, ticket number 4. Last week, after a policy change by another engineer, users from the marketing department were able to access the HR file server shares. Can you identify the root cause and remediate this issue ASAP? Okay, so let's take a look at our policy table. And it's saying that after a policy change, the marketing users were able to get to the HR file servers. So if we take a look at our policies, we can see that we have Insight to Internet overrule issue right here. Why? We configure an employee subnet denied to Netflix, so this rule blocked the employees from reaching Netflix. But guess what? Insight to Internet is before that, so it matches this one, so the employees will still be able to get to Netflix. What you have to do is drag this down so the employee subnet denied to Netflix rule takes precedence. And that way you know that you're going to block access to Netflix but still allow access to everything else. Okay, let's continue on to that ticket number 4. And I can see here that there's a policy access to server, inside, entire network, servers, server address object. That means that my entire network is allowed access to the servers. And this is a very common scenario, folks. I actually see this happening everywhere, and meaning that it's easy for someone to make something work. Instead of troubleshooting, just allow the whole thing, and then you have no purpose on the firewall, because if you're doing any, there's no point of putting a firewall if you are going to allow any between zones. So this is a very common scenario. You got to be very careful, because this, even though that you have a firewall, you might not even be doing anything with it. So we have to fix this. In this case, well, we don't know what also it's allowed, and again, we want to limit the impact of this change. Our ticket was only to avoid or deny access to the HR from the marketing team. So let's go ahead and configure that policy. Okay, let's call this marketing deny to HR servers, and source inside, source address. You know what? I have my employee subnet, because it's part of that, the marketing, it's sitting here, but how do I know that I can classify based on the marketing? This is where the user policy will come in place. We'll click the user tab, and then we're gonna add a user group. And remember, on a previous video, we have access to our AD, so we can classify the traffic to our AD environment. So one way to do it is grabbing the marketing team, right? And then adding this as our source user, and then configuring the policy and then denying it. So that way you're blocking the marketing team. Another way is, because it's HR, so someone else, it's only HR should be able to hit that. Because right now, if we put a policy for the marketing team, if there's any other team that is not HR, they will still be able to go to the server. So it's better to allow what needs to be allowed than to deny every single subnet that it's not allowed to hit the policy. So you just make a cleaner policy table by only allowing what's allowed and then denying everything else. Let me show you real quick. User, in this case, we're going to allow the HR staff to hit their servers. Destination, in this case, will be the servers, and I have the add object here. We can create a new one, HR server, and we can say this is the 10.30.0.10.32 because it's a single host, or you can just leave this without. Click OK. Now we have destination address as my HR server, application any, and then in this case it's any, or unless you know the file share protocol that you're using. Actions allowed. Okay, so now we know that the HR staff inside the employee subnet, they're going to be able to hit that HR server. However, I still have an overruling because rule 2 allows everything, and this rule will not take place. So let's move this right one step below this one. And now I am allowing, by the way, I should rename this. Let's go ahead and rename that. Say HR allow to HR server. And then from the employee subnet, I am allowing the HR staff to go to the HR server as my destination. And let's go ahead and configure another one to deny everything else. In this case, deny access to HR servers. Source, add inside source address the employee subnet going to the destination, which is the server side destination address, the HR server, and then let's leave this in default. Actions, we're going to deny. Okay, and then make sure that it's denied. We'll click OK. And now we have that rule which will deny access to the HR servers. What we need to do to make this effective, because we still have access to servers, which we're going to allow everything, even though that I'm only allowing the HR to go to the HR servers on rule number 2. Rule number 3 is it's going to allow every single IP on the network to hit the servers. We want to make sure that we deny access to the HR server. So let's go ahead and move that policy right on top of access to server. And now we can say that anyone belonging to the employee subnet will be denied access to the HR server. Again, you want to limit the impact of this change because you don't know, first of all, what was done by the previous engineer, what was the reason behind it. But if you block unnecessary IPs from reaching a destination, you might disrupt production, so you don't want to do that. You want to, meet the requirements. What the ticket was to deny access to the HR server to the marketing team, but you basically made a rule to allow HR hit their servers and deny everyone else. So once every other member of the corporation needs to reach this HR server, they will be denied by this policy, and they're not going to go and fall onto the access global policy. And there you have it. Straightforward. And it's actually very important for you to understand order of operations. In this case, top to bottom. The Palo Alto will take a look at the policies from top to bottom, and it's going to enforce the traffic by doing that. If you have a policy that it's overruling another one, you might see that you are still allowing traffic even though that you put a policy to block it. Chances are there's a rule on top of that taking priority versus the one that you configured. So you got to be very careful on that, but practice makes perfection. So I actually recommend you to start practicing your security policies in a dev environment, so you make sure that you configure this accordingly, and make sure that you also label your objects clearly and as well as the policy, so you know what they're doing. Okay, so we just finished our security policy section video. In our next video, we're going to take a look at routing context.